"Mom, your name's not on the list." Those were the words my son said to me at the entrance to my granddaughter's wedding, in front of 200 witnesses. My name is Margaret Barnes, I'm 72 years old, and I'm a widow. But there was one detail they forgot: every single cent of that celebration came out of my bank account. I spent all morning getting ready. You know how it is when your granddaughter gets married? Your first granddaughter, no less. It's the kind of moment you wait your whole life for. I woke up at 6 in the morning, even though the ceremony wasn't until 4 in the afternoon. I couldn't sleep anyway. My heart was racing with excitement, with pride, with that bittersweet feeling that comes when you realize the little girl you raised is now a woman starting her own family. It feels like just yesterday I was changing Clara's diapers, teaching that little girl how to make apple pie, the kind my late husband Robert loved so much, and now she was getting married. A grandmother's heart can barely hold all that pride. I remember the day she was born, how Richard called me at 3 in the morning, his voice shaking with emotion. "Mom, it's a girl. She's perfect." I drove to the hospital in my nightgown, too excited to even change clothes. When I held Clara for the first time, she wrapped her tiny fingers around mine, and I knew right then that this child would own a piece of my heart forever. I picked out my best dress, a pink silk one I'd been saving for a special occasion. I'd bought it 2 years ago at a boutique in downtown Phoenix, spending more than I normally would on clothes, but the saleswoman convinced me. "Mrs. Margaret," she'd said, "a woman like you deserves to feel beautiful." The dress still had the original tags on it. I'd been waiting for the perfect moment. And what could be more perfect than my granddaughter's wedding? I put on my mother's pearl necklace, each pearl smooth and lustrous, carrying decades of family history. My mother wore it on her wedding day. I wore it on mine. And I'd always imagined passing it to Clara one day, continuing the tradition. I clasped it around my neck, feeling the weight of generations of women who'd loved deeply and sacrificed everything for their families. I applied that French perfume I only wear on holy days, Chanel No. 5, the one Robert bought me on our 25th anniversary during our trip to Paris. It was our only international trip, and he'd saved for 2 years to make it happen. I remember standing in that boutique on the Champs-Élysées, him insisting I choose the most expensive perfume. "Nothing but the best for my Margaret," he'd said, kissing my forehead. "Every time I wear it, I smell him, feel him, remember him." I spent an hour on my makeup, something I rarely do anymore. My hands aren't as steady as they used to be, and my eyes aren't as sharp, but vanity has no age limit, especially on days like this. I wanted to look my best. I wanted Clara to look across that wedding venue and see her grandmother, elegant, dignified, proud. I wanted her to see where she came from, the strength in her bloodline, the love that had been poured into raising her father, and then into raising her. I did my hair myself, pinning it up in the style I used to wear when I was younger, when Robert would call me his silver screen beauty, and kiss the nape of my neck. I looked at myself in the mirror and, for a moment, I saw that young woman again, the one who'd gotten married at 20, the one who'd believed in fairy tales and happy endings. I felt beautiful, dignified. I wanted Clara to look at me and see a happy grandmother, a matriarch holding the family together with love and tradition. Little did I know that the role my son Richard had cast me in was that of a nuisance, an embarrassment, a burden to be hidden away. For the past 6 months, my entire life had revolved around that wedding. It started on a Sunday afternoon in March when Richard and my daughter-in-law Sandra showed up at my house unannounced. I was in the kitchen making a pot roast, my hands covered in flour, when I heard the doorbell. "Mom, we need to talk," Richard had said, his face serious as they settled onto my velvet couch, the one I'd bought with Robert 30 years ago and had reupholstered twice because I couldn't bear to part with it. Sandra sat beside him, perfectly manicured nails drumming on her designer purse, her eyes scanning my modest living room with that look I'd learned to recognize over the years. The look that said my home wasn't good enough, my furniture was outdated, my whole life was somehow insufficient. "Is everything okay?" I asked, wiping my hands on my apron and feeling suddenly self-conscious about the flower on my cheek, the simple house dress I was wearing. Clara's engaged, Richard announced. My heart soared. Oh my God. That's wonderful. When did this happen? Why didn't anyone tell me? I moved toward him, ready to hug him, to celebrate, but something in his posture stopped me. It just happened last week, Sandra interjected, her voice smooth as honey but somehow cold. We wanted to tell you in person because, well, there's a situation. They sat there, drinking my coffee, the good coffee I'd bought especially because I knew they were coming, even though they'd said it was unannounced, and with the sweetest eyes in the world, explained their difficulties. The way they told it, you'd think they were struggling to put food on the table. But I'd seen Sandra's new Mercedes parked outside. I'd noticed Richard's Rolex, the one he'd bought himself last Christmas. Mom, you know how tough things are right now, Richard began, using that patronizing tone that made me feel like a child instead of the woman who'd raised him, who'd worked 2 jobs after his father got sick to make sure he could finish college. The economy, the bills, everything's just piling up. And we want so badly to give Clara her dream wedding. Sandra pulled out her phone and started showing me pictures. We found the perfect venue, she gushed. The Golden Oaks Estate. It's where all the best families have their celebrations. But it's expensive, and with the house payments and Clara's student loans. She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. We were thinking maybe you could help out, Richard said, not quite meeting my eyes. You know, contribute something toward the wedding. Whatever you can afford. Fool that I was, I opened both my heart and my wallet. How much does my granddaughter's dream wedding cost? I asked, already reaching for my purse, already mentally calculating how much I had in savings. What followed was a masterclass in manipulation. They showed me estimates, an estate on the outskirts of Phoenix that looked like a palace, with marble columns and crystal chandeliers and gardens that stretched for acres. A banquet featuring lobster, prime rib, imported wines, and a dessert bar that looked like something from a royal wedding. A dress that cost as much as a used car, but it was a Vera Wang, Sandra explained, and Clara had always dreamed of wearing Vera Wang. How much are we talking about total? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Well, Sandra pulled out a folder, organized with color-coded tabs. She'd come prepared. The venue is $12,000, the catering is $15,000, the dress is $8,000, flowers are $3,000, photography is $4,500, the band is $5,000, and then there are the invitations, the decorations, the cake, the party favors. She rattled off numbers like an auctioneer, and my head spun. That's over $50,000, I said, my heart sinking. Actually, we managed to negotiate some things down, Richard jumped in. If you could cover $48,000, we can handle the rest. $48,000. It was more than half of my savings. The money Robert had left me, the money from selling his truck after he died, the money I'd been carefully managing for the past 5 years, living frugally so I'd have something to leave to my family when I was gone. I should have said no. I should have told them that was too much, that they needed to scale back, have a simpler wedding, something more in line with what they could actually afford. But when I looked at Richard's face, my baby boy, my only child, I saw that little kid who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and call them roses. I saw the teenager who'd cried in my arms when his first girlfriend broke his heart. I saw the young man who'd promised me at his own wedding that he'd always take care of me, just like his father had. Okay, I heard myself say. I'll pay for it. The relief on their faces should have been my first warning. Sandra actually clapped her hands together like a child getting a present. Richard hugged me, but it felt perfunctory, like he was already thinking about what to do next. You're the best, Mom, he said. Clara's going to be so happy. And don't worry, we'll make sure you're treated like the VIP you are. Front row seat, special mention in the speeches, the whole 9 yards. And I paid for it. I paid for everything, every single penny. More than $48,000. All transferred from my account in installments over the next 6 months. The account Robert left me so I could have a peaceful retirement and help out the family when they really needed it. He'd worked himself to the bone driving that delivery truck, taking extra shifts, saving every penny he could. "This is for you, my love," he'd told me in those final days at the hospital. "So you never have to worry, so you can live comfortably, so you can help Richard if he needs it." I signed the contracts. Every single one of them. I spent hours on the phone with vendors, negotiating prices, asking about package deals, trying to stretch that money as far as it would go. I negotiated with the florist to use seasonal flowers instead of imported roses. I convinced the caterer to offer a slightly smaller portion size so we could afford the lobster Sandra insisted on. I became a part-time wedding planner, and I did it all with joy in my heart because I thought I was building something beautiful for my granddaughter. My name was on every piece of paperwork for that party. Margaret Barnes, primary client. Margaret Barnes, financial guarantor. Margaret Barnes, emergency contact. My signature was on the venue contract, the catering agreement, the florist's invoice, the photographer's release forms. Everything. Over those 6 months, I visited Richard and Sandra's house every Sunday for what they called wedding planning meetings. I'd bring homemade cookies or a casserole, and we'd sit around their dining table going over details. But as time went on, I noticed a shift. My suggestions were dismissed more and more frequently. "Actually, Mom, that's not really the aesthetic we're going for," Sandra would say when I proposed anything. When I suggested making the wedding favors myself, little bags of homemade cookies, a family tradition, Sandra actually laughed. "Oh, Mrs. Margaret, that's sweet, but we've already ordered custom macarons from that French bakery downtown. We want everything to look cohesive and professional." Professional. As if my love, my effort, my decades of baking for family celebrations were somehow amateur. I noticed that Clara stopped coming to these meetings. At first, I thought she was just busy with work and wedding planning of her own. But when I'd ask about her, Sandra would wave a dismissive hand. "Oh, Clara's so overwhelmed with everything. We're really trying to take the burden off her shoulders." I should have insisted on speaking to Clara directly. I should have asked her what she actually wanted for her wedding. But I was so caught up in the excitement, in the planning, in feeling needed and useful, that I didn't push. 2 weeks before the wedding, I went to Sandra and Richard's house to drop off my final payment, a check for $6,000 to cover some last-minute additions Sandra said were absolutely necessary. When I arrived, I heard voices from the patio. The sliding door was slightly open, and I was about to call out when I heard my name. "I still can't believe she fell for it," Sandra was saying, her voice filled with amusement. $48,000. I thought we'd have to work harder to convince her. "She'd give me anything," Richard replied, and there was something in his tone, not love, not gratitude, but something uglier. Entitlement. "She always has. It's like taking candy from a baby." "Well, now we can afford that honeymoon in Cancun for Clara and Michael," Sandra continued. "I was worried we'd have to cheap out on that, but your mom came through. Though honestly, Richard, do we really have to invite her to the wedding? She's going to embarrass us in front of Michael's family. You know how she is, that awful accent, those outdated clothes, the way she talks so loud." My hand froze on the door handle. I stood there, barely breathing, waiting for Richard to defend me. Waiting for my son to say, "Don't talk about my mother that way." Waiting for the boy I'd raised to remember who had sacrificed everything for him. Instead, he laughed. He actually laughed. I know. But we have to invite her. It would look worse if we didn't. We'll just stick her in the back somewhere, away from the important guests. Michael's parents don't need to know that side of the family. That side of the family. Like I was something shameful, something to hide. I set the check on their porch table and left without saying a word. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the wheel. When I got home, I sat in Robert's old recliner and cried for the first time since his funeral. Not gentle tears, but gut-wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken inside me. But here's the thing about betrayal, it has a way of clarifying things. In the days that followed, I started paying attention to details I'd overlooked. I noticed that in all the wedding planning documents, my name appeared only on the financial sections. The invitation list? I wasn't consulted. The seating chart? I never saw it. The program? No mention of the grandmother of the bride. I called Clara 3 times that week. Each time, it went to voicemail. She never called back. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the clock tick away the hours. At 3 a.m., I got up and went to Robert's portrait in the living room. It's a photo from our 25th anniversary, both of us smiling, his arm around my waist, my head on his shoulder. "What do I do, my love?" I whispered to his image. "What would you do?" But I knew what Robert would do. He'd put on his best suit, hold his head high, and go to that wedding with dignity. He'd say that family is family, and sometimes you have to swallow your pride for the people you love. So that's what I decided to do. The day of the wedding, I woke up early and went through my beautification routine with military precision. I took a long bath, using the lavender salts I usually save for special occasions. I moisturized my skin with cream that smelled like roses. I did my hair, my makeup, put on that pink silk dress and those pearls, and I looked at myself in the mirror. "You are Margaret Barnes," I told my reflection. "You are a good mother, a good grandmother, a good woman. You have nothing to be ashamed of." I took an Uber because I didn't trust myself to drive, my emotions were too raw, too close to the surface. The driver, a nice young man named Marcus, was chatty and friendly. "You look really elegant, ma'am, must be heading to quite the party." I smiled, practicing the grandmother smile I'd need for the next few hours. "I'm going to the happiest day of my granddaughter's life." "That's beautiful," he said. "I bet she's lucky to have a grandmother like you." "Thank you," I whispered, my throat tight with emotion. When we pulled up to the Golden Oaks estate, I sat in the car for a moment, gathering my courage. The place was even more stunning than the photos, white flower arches dripping with roses and peonies, thousands of tiny lights strung up in the ancient oak trees, soft classical music floating through the air. Guests were arriving in luxury cars, all dressed to the nines, laughing and chatting. About 200 people, maybe more. I paid Marcus and added a generous tip. "Thank you for the kind words," I told him. "Enjoy the wedding, ma'am. And hey, your granddaughter is lucky to have you there." If only he knew how unwanted I actually was. I walked toward the entrance, my heels clicking on the stone pathway. People I knew were everywhere, family, friends, neighbors, distant relatives I hadn't seen in years. They greeted me warmly from a distance. "Good evening, Mrs. Margaret. What a gorgeous party." "Mrs. Barnes, you look beautiful." "Margaret. So good to see you." I smiled and waved, feeling a flutter of hope. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe that conversation I'd overheard had been taken out of context. Maybe today would be beautiful after all. I walked proudly toward the main entrance, where an elegant table was set up with place cards and a guest book. Richard and Sandra stood there in all their glory, greeting guests like royalty receiving their subjects. My son wore a custom-tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Sandra had on an emerald green dress that sparkled with what looked like real crystals, her hair styled in an elaborate updo, her makeup professionally done. She looked like she was attending the Oscars, not her daughter's wedding. "Richard, my son, what a blessing," I said, my voice warm despite the nervousness fluttering in my stomach. I moved closer to kiss him, arms already opening for an embrace. He didn't move. He didn't smile. He didn't show any sign of the warmth a son should show his mother. Instead, he looked at me, then glanced around at the crowd of arriving guests, and his face hardened. His jaw clenched. His eyes went cold. He didn't look like the boy I'd nursed through fevers and nightmares. He didn't look like the teenager I'd stayed up with during his college entrance exams, making him coffee and encouraging him when he wanted to give up. He didn't look like the young man who'd once told me I was his hero. He looked like a bank manager about to deny me a loan, like a bouncer about to throw someone out of a club, like a stranger who'd been deeply inconvenienced. Sandra looked away and pretended to adjust a flower arrangement, but I could see the smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. "Mom," he said, his voice cold as ice, loud enough that several nearby guests turned to look. "What are you doing here?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I actually stepped back, confused, certain I'd misheard. "What do you mean, what am I doing here?" "I came to watch my granddaughter get married." "I came to the party, what else?" My voice came out shakier than I'd intended. I could feel people starting to stare, conversations dying down around us, a circle of attention forming with me at the uncomfortable center. That's when he grabbed the clipboard from the receptionist, a young woman in a black dress who looked increasingly uncomfortable with the situation unfolding in front of her. Richard ran his finger down the list once, twice, his expression growing more severe with each pass, like a teacher searching for a student's name to confirm they've been expelled. The music seemed to lower. Or maybe it was just my hearing, my whole world narrowing down to this moment, this clipboard, this list that apparently determined my worth. The 200 people in line behind me fell silent. I could feel every single eye on me, could sense the whispers starting, the phones being subtly raised to record this drama. "Mom, you're not on the list," he said, loud enough for everyone within 20 feet to hear clearly. Loud enough that there could be no mistake, no misunderstanding. Loud enough to ensure my humiliation was public and complete. My smile, the grandmother smile I'd been practicing in the mirror all morning, froze on my face. "What do you mean I'm not on the list, Richard? What kind of joke is this?" "It's not a joke," he said, his voice sharp with impatience, like I was a slow customer holding up a line. "Your name's not here. There must have been some mix-up with the invitation." A mix-up with the invitation. The invitation I'd paid for. The invitations that cost $1,000 for custom calligraphy and handmade paper. The list I'd helped Sandra review 6 weeks ago, making sure no aunt from the old neighborhood would get left out, making sure every distant cousin was included because family is everything, as Sandra had said so sweetly while I wrote another check. The humiliation rushed up my face like a fever. My cheeks burned so hot I thought my makeup might melt. My hands started trembling, so I clutched my purse tighter to hide it. I looked at Sandra, she was no longer pretending to arrange flowers. Now she was watching me openly, and that tiny, victorious smile on her face told me everything. This wasn't a mix-up. This wasn't an accident. This was intentional, calculated, cruel. I looked around at the 200 people watching this spectacle. I saw Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor of 30 years, standing there with her hand over her mouth in shock. We'd raised our kids together, borrowed sugar from each other, cried on each other's shoulders through widowhood. Now she was watching me be humiliated, and she said nothing. I saw my nephew Chris, Richard's cousin, who I'd helped pay for braces when his parents couldn't afford it, pretending to look at his phone, refusing to meet my eyes. I saw Sandra's parents, standing 20 feet away, whispering to each other and smirking. I'd sent them a bottle of expensive wine last Christmas. I'd complimented Sandra's mother at every family gathering. And now they were enjoying this. Nobody said a word. Nobody defended me. Nobody said, "Wait, this has to be a mistake, that's Clara's grandmother." Nobody asked why the woman who paid for this entire celebration was being turned away at the door like an uninvited guest. I was being kicked out in front of everyone, treated like a party crasher, like a beggar, like a crazy old woman who'd showed up at the wrong event. Treated like I was nothing. For a moment, I thought about making a scene. I thought about pulling out my phone and showing them the bank transfers, the signed contracts, the receipts for every single thing they were standing next to. I thought about screaming, about demanding to see Clara, about forcing my way in. But then I heard Robert's voice in my head, as clear as if he were standing beside me. "Dignity, my love. Never let them see you break. Never give them that power. I took a deep breath. A lifetime of dignity wasn't going to be destroyed by an ungrateful son and his calculating wife. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry or make a scene. I wasn't going to let them turn me into the crazy grandmother, the hysterical old woman, the embarrassment they clearly already thought I was. I straightened my mother's pearl necklace, feeling the weight of it against my throat, drawing strength from generations of strong women who'd survived worse than this. I looked Richard straight in the eyes, my son, my only child, the baby I'd almost died bringing into this world. "All right, son," I said, my voice steady and clear. To my own surprise, it didn't shake. It didn't break. It was the voice of a woman who'd survived a husband's death, who'd worked 2 jobs, who'd raised a child alone, who'd built a life from nothing. If it was a mix-up, I apologize for being a bother. The word bother hung in the air like an accusation. Because that's what I was to them now. Not mom. Not grandma. Just a bother. I turned around and began the longest, most excruciating walk of my life. It felt like miles, even though it was probably only 50 yards. The crowd of 200 people parted to let me through, stepping back like I had some contagious disease. The path they created was wide, ensuring no one had to actually touch me, no one had to acknowledge what they were witnessing. Nobody touched me. Nobody offered an arm to steady my shaking legs. Nobody whispered, "I'm so sorry." Nobody followed me to ask what happened. I walked alone, completely alone, through a crowd of people who'd known me for decades. I walked with my head held high, my back straight, my eyes forward. I passed under the flower arches I'd paid $3,000 for, walking on the white carpet I'd chosen because Clara mentioned once when she was 12 that she'd always dreamed of a white carpet wedding. I listened to the classical music, Pachelbel's Canon in D, which I'd specifically requested because it was Robert's favorite, knowing it was the last time I'd hear it in this context. I was leaving the party I'd provided. The celebration I'd sacrificed for. The wedding I'd spent 6 months planning and financing and dreaming about. Behind me, I heard the whispers start up again, the conversations resume. Life was moving on. The show was over. The spectacle of the grandmother being removed had concluded, and now everyone could go back to enjoying the free food and open bar and beautiful venue that I had paid for. When I reached the parking area, Marcus, my Uber driver, was still there, waiting for another fare. When he saw me, his cheerful expression immediately changed to concern. "What happened, ma'am? Did you forget something?" he asked, already opening the car door for me. "Yes," I said as I got in, my voice hollow. "I forgot who my son really is." He didn't ask any more questions. He just drove, occasionally glancing at me in the rearview mirror with worried eyes. I stared out the window, watching the beautiful venue disappear behind me, watching the lights fade, watching $48,000 and 6 months of my life and a lifetime of motherhood vanish into the distance. The ride home was silent except for the sound of traffic and my own breathing. I focused on breathing, in and out, because if I stopped focusing on that, I might fall apart completely. The rage from that public humiliation was so intense I couldn't even cry. It was beyond tears. It was a white-hot anger that made my whole body shake, that made my chest feel tight, that made me want to scream until my voice gave out. They'd used me. They'd smiled to my face while planning to discard me. They'd taken my money, drained my savings, exploited my love for my granddaughter, and when it came time to celebrate, they'd tossed me aside like an orange peel after the juice is gone. Like garbage. Like I was nothing. They wanted my money, but they didn't want me. I embarrassed them, the old lady with the thick accent and the outdated clothes and the habit of talking too loud. The mother who'd sacrificed everything was now an inconvenience to the son who'd benefited from every sacrifice. When Marcus pulled up to my building, I paid him and added another generous tip. "Thank you for your kindness," I said. "I'm sorry your evening didn't go as planned, ma'am," he said gently. "Whatever happened back there, it's their loss, not yours." Simple words from a stranger, but they cracked something open inside me. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and hurried into my building before the tears could come. At home, the silence of my apartment was deafening. It pressed against my ears like water, drowning me. Every familiar object seemed to mock me: the photos of Richard as a baby, the framed picture of his college graduation, the Mother's Day cards he'd given me over the years with words like, "Best mom ever," and "I couldn't have done it without you." All lies. Pretty lies written on cards bought at the drugstore, signed without thought, given without meaning. The pink dress that had made me feel beautiful this morning now looked like a ridiculous costume, like I'd been playing dress-up in clothes too young for me, pretending to be someone I wasn't. I took it off and threw it on the floor, wanting it away from my skin. I stood there in my slip and pearls, shaking with rage and humiliation and grief. I walked to the living room and stood in front of Robert's portrait. In the photo, he's smiling, his eyes crinkled at the corners the way they always did when he was truly happy. He's wearing his favorite flannel shirt, the one I'd tried to throw away 100 times because it was so worn, but he'd always rescued it from the trash. "This shirt has good memories," he'd say. "Robert," I whispered to his image, my voice cracking. "They threw me out. Our son threw me out. What do I do? Tell me what to do." But Robert couldn't answer. Robert was gone. He'd been gone for 5 years, and in those 5 years, I'd managed. I'd survived the loneliness, the grief, the fear of growing old alone. I'd told myself I still had Richard, I still had family, I wasn't alone. But now I knew the truth. I was alone. I'd been alone all along. I could have sat down and cried until I had no tears left. I could have called my sisters, Rita in Portland and Carol in Denver, and complained for hours while they made sympathetic noises and told me to pray about it. I could have taken one of the sleeping pills my doctor prescribed for nights when the loneliness was too much, swallowed it with a glass of wine, and let unconsciousness take me away from this pain. But standing there in my living room, something shifted inside me. The grief began to crystallize into something harder, sharper, clearer. The Margaret who'd been humiliated at that wedding, the foolish grandmother who'd let herself be used, who'd opened her wallet and her heart without question, that Margaret was dying. In her place, someone else was emerging. Someone harder. Someone who remembered that before she was a soft grandmother who baked cookies and forgave everything, she'd been Margaret Barnes, the woman who'd kept her husband's delivery business running for 10 years after he got too sick to work. The woman who'd balanced the books, negotiated with suppliers, dealt with difficult customers, and managed to keep food on the table and her son in school. The woman who knew the value of every dollar because she'd earned every single one. That Margaret, the strong one, the capable one, the one who'd survived everything life threw at her, that Margaret was waking up. I didn't cry. Instead, I walked to my small home office, really just a converted bedroom with a desk and filing cabinet, and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a thick cream-colored folder labeled, "Clara's Wedding," in my careful handwriting. I spread the contents across my desk like evidence at a crime scene. And that's exactly what it was, evidence of theft, of elder abuse, of manipulation and cruelty. Inside were all the contracts, every single one signed in my name. Margaret Barnes, primary client. Margaret Barnes, financial guarantor. The venue contract, $12,000, my signature on the bottom line, payment in full, receipt attached. The catering agreement, $15,000, deposit paid, balance paid, confirmation of menu selection with my initials on every page. The florist's invoice, $3,000, detailed list of arrangements, all approved and paid for by me. The photographer's contract, $4,500, package details, rights and releases, my signature. The band contract, $5,000, song list attached with my handwritten notes about which songs Robert used to love. The dress invoice, $8,000 for a Vera Wang gown that Clara would wear for 4 hours while I wasn't even allowed in the building. The invitation printing, $1,000 for custom calligraphy on handmade paper. Invitations that had been sent to 200 people, but not to me. The woman who paid for them wasn't important enough to receive one. Page after page of bank transfer confirmations, each one showing money leaving my account and going to various vendors. My savings, Robert's legacy, our retirement fund, drained for a party I wasn't welcome to attend. I added it all up on my calculator, even though I already knew the total. $51,500. More than I'd told my sisters I was spending. More than I'd admitted to myself I was spending. More than half of everything I had in the world. I picked up my phone. It was about 8:30 at night, but I knew he'd answer. Attorney Matthew Richardson had been handling legal matters for me since Robert got sick. He'd helped me with the business transition, with Robert's estate, with setting up my will. He was expensive, but he was good, and more importantly, he was honest. Good evening, Attorney Richardson. This is Margaret Barnes. Mrs. Barnes. His voice was warm, welcoming. What a surprise. Congratulations, today's your granddaughter's big day, isn't it? How was the wedding? My lips curved into a smile with no joy in it, no warmth in it. An iron smile. A shark smile. The smile of a woman who just decided to stop being a victim. Attorney Richardson, you've been my lawyer for over 30 years because you're the best. And tomorrow morning I need you to be the best. You got 5 minutes? The tone of my voice must have alerted him because his own voice immediately shifted from social to professional. For you, Mrs. Barnes, I've got all night. What happened? I was asked to leave the party I paid for. I said it calmly, factually, like I was reporting the weather. My son and daughter-in-law made a little miscalculation. They thought they could keep my money and treat me like garbage. I need you to help me correct that mistake. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, tell me everything. So I did. I told him about the 6 months of manipulation, the overheard conversation on the patio, the humiliation at the entrance, every detail. I could hear him taking notes, his pen scratching across paper. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Mrs. Barnes, what they did isn't just morally wrong, it's potentially actionable. Elder financial abuse, fraud, breach of contract. How much documentation do you have? Everything, I said. Every contract, every receipt, every bank transfer. All in my name. Don't touch any of it. Don't talk to them. Don't respond to any calls or messages. I'm going to need you to come to my office first thing Monday morning with all those documents. We're going to make sure this is handled correctly. What can we do? I asked. Well, he said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice, since your name is on all the contracts, you're legally the client. That means you have the right to cancel any ongoing services, request refunds for services not rendered, and potentially sue for fraud. At minimum, we can make their lives very difficult. At maximum, Mrs. Barnes, you might get most of your money back. The pain was still there, the shame still burned like acid in my chest, but now there was something else. Something cold and sharp and clarifying. A plan. Richard thought he'd shut me out of the party. He didn't know he'd just opened the door to consequences he couldn't imagine. Thank you, Matthew, I said. I'll see you Monday morning. Mrs. Barnes, he said before I could hang up. I'm sorry this happened to you. You deserve better. Your son should be ashamed of himself. After I hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time, looking at all those papers. The evidence of my foolishness, yes, but also evidence of my rights. Proof that I wasn't just the discarded grandmother. I was the client. The contractor. The one with the legal standing. I thought about Richard, probably dancing at his daughter's wedding right now, drinking the expensive champagne I'd paid for, eating the lobster I'd been too poor to have at my own wedding but had provided for his daughter. Accepting congratulations from guests for throwing such a magnificent party. Taking credit for everything while the woman who'd actually made it possible sat alone in her apartment, nursing her wounds. He thought the night was over. He thought he'd won. He had no idea that the Real story was only just beginning. To be continued. If Margaret's story is touching your heart, hit that like button and subscribe. In the next part, We'll see exactly what Margaret did next, and how she took back not just her money, but her dignity. Tell me in the comments, if you were in Margaret's shoes, what would you have done? And where are you listening from? Your support means everything.